what started my writing career was an incident that happened that changed my life. And it was a life-changing event. I was on patrol as a patrol sergeant, and it was in Las Vegas. Just off the famed Las Vegas Strip, there are areas of town that are not quite so famous. And as I was on patrol, I saw a car up on the side of the road on the sidewalk in a weird position, and people running around screaming. And I had no idea what was taking place, of course. So I radioed that I'd be out with an unknown trouble. And as I got out of the police car and started moving towards the car that was parked up on the sidewalk, I heard somebody screaming, "Oh my God, the baby's been shot." And as I approached the car, it was absolute bedlam. People are running around screaming. I had no idea what's taking place. There on the ground next to the car is a infant seat holding a 1-month-old baby. And the baby is bleeding profusely from the face. And what had taken place was mom and dad, immigrants from El Salvador, completely innocent of doing anything wrong, were on the way to the store, and they had their baby in the back seat in an infant seat. And 3 gangbangers pulled up alongside of them, and in what we later determined to be a gang initiation, just opened fire on the car for absolutely no reason, and riddled the car with bullets. One of the bullets hit the baby right in the face, right in the front of her face, and of course her head's this big, so the bullet did a lot of damage. And of course I didn't know all that at the time, but all I see is a 1-month-old who is grievously injured. And I called for backup. I didn't even know if the shooters were still there. So you can imagine the scene. I'm looking all over. I'm looking for the threats, but my focus is the baby. I can't wait for an ambulance to get there. If I wait for the ambulance, the baby's going to die. And I checked her vitals, and she wasn't breathing. So the first patrol car got there within seconds, and I violated all the rules, but I felt like I had to do it. I just scooped the baby up, and I jumped in the passenger seat, and I said, "Get me to the trauma center," and radio what we're bringing in, a baby that's not breathing. Well, I was able to scoop all of the blood and tissue that had gone down into the baby's throat, which is what choked her to death. I was able to scoop that out and give her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and bring her back. Because I was there literally within minutes of this shooting, when I was able to breathe life back into her and bring her back, she suffered absolutely no brain damage because she wasn't deprived of oxygen long enough. When we got to the hospital, of course, the doctors and nurses were literally waiting outside, and it was like handing off a football. And they grabbed the baby and they worked their magic, and we saved that baby's life. Well, I left duty that night with just a huge range of emotions, and I felt like I had to write that story for some reason. So I did. I pulled out a bottle of scotch and I took out the yellow pad and I wrote that story. It had nothing to do with it. I just felt like I needed to write it. So after it was done, I stuck it in a drawer, and there it sat for years. It sat in that drawer until, that was 1998, and it sat in that drawer until September 11th, 2001. The Trade Center was attacked, and our nation suffered the trauma of terrorism in the largest way that we ever could have imagined. And besides the loss of life of all the citizens that happened when those towers came crashing down, it also became the most deadly day in history for law enforcement in America. 72 police officers were killed in the line of duty, both from the New York City Police Department and the Port Authority. And I was so frustrated at not being able to be there to help that my mind started going, and I thought, how can I help? And my mind slipped back to that evening when I saved that baby. And I thought to myself, every cop in this nation has a story like that. Every police officer knows what it's like to face life-changing circumstances. I'm going to ask police officers from around the country to share a story like that with me that I can put into a book. And I can not only show the people that we serve the realities of policing in a way that's never been done before from the police officers themselves, but I can also raise money for the Widows and Orphans Fund for the police officers who were killed in the Trade Center attack. And that's what I did. So I'm collecting stories from cops from all over the country. It was for my first book. It was called True Blue, Police Stories by Those Who Have Lived Them. And I took that story and I entered it into a national writers contest. And I wound up being picked as one of the finalists. So I went to the final cut, if you will, where the winners are going to be announced, and it was up in Seattle. And to my great shock, I wound up winning first place for nonfiction for that story. And one of the judges, after the choices were over, and I won that award, one of the judges came out, and it turned out that he was a retired New York City police captain who was a novelist for St. Martin's Press. So over a couple of scotches, we discussed my writing career, which didn't pretty much exist. And he said, "What are you going to do with this story?" And I said, "Well, right now I'm in the midst of creating a book called True Blue, Police Stories by Those Who Have Lived Them." And I told him the concept. And he said, that's a great concept. He says, "Who's your agent?" And I said, "Well, I haven't got that far yet." He said, "I'll tell you what, when you're done with it, let me take a look at it. Maybe I can give you some guidance." Now, there's a lot of people that talk that talk, but don't walk that walk. He wasn't one of them. And we stayed in contact. And when I got the manuscript done, I mailed it to him. And what I didn't know was that he was very good friends with the editor-in-chief at St. Martin's Press. And he walked that manuscript into the office of that editor-in-chief and said, "You need to read this book." And that's how my writing career began.